Well, of all the, when you think back, I mean, you remember the different people, but who do you remember the most that you worked with or worked for in the Jumpers?
Fred Cable and doggone it, the law foreman.
Samsel?
Samsel, yeah, how can I? Senior moment. Yeah, Hal, he was quite the character.
So when you left the Jumpers, that was 1968 was your last year jumping, and you then in '69 what'd you do?
69, well, it was actually December of '68. I graduated from college, and so '66 and '67 is when I jumped, and '68 I graduated from college in December, and applied to the Forest Service for some full-time professional positions as a forester. And while I was waiting for a response to those, since I already had my career conditional, it was just a matter of time till I got a position. And or if I didn't get a position, I could go back to jumping that spring. So I went down to Texas to see where my family had spent a lot of time in the Big Bend country and whatnot, where my granddad ranched and great-granddad had owned a ranch, and the old Chambers Hotel and whatnot in Marathon. And one of the friends of the family had ran the Remuda at Big Bend National Park, and asked me if I'd come down and work for him for a while till he could get some more help in there. So I went in and managed the Remuda for him, and would take dudes out on trail rides and whatnot. And it was fairly calm, except for one day when I had about 20 dudes out on the trail, and it was incredible. You don't see these things very often, but I heard the worst sounding caterwauling and screaming and whatnot you could ever hear. And I'm up in front of where the dudes were, and so I rode up to the front, and over this little swale came this coyote, just running as fast as he could. And about a half step behind him was this huge bobcat, just a screeching and yelling, and but every other step he'd take a swat at that coyote's butt, and just phew. And unfortunately they were headed right for my dudes. And oh man, if those guys got in the middle of my dudes, I'd have dudes all over the hillside. So I ended up having to try to ride up and get between the dudes and the show, and was able to, and I was able to get them turned, and so they turned away and went over the hill. And the last I saw them, the bobcat was still chasing the coyote and taking swings at him.
Well, so was it Marathon that the Chambers Hotel was in, or was it Marfa?
Let's see. I think it was Marfa, but I'd have to look to make sure.
But it's just around the Big Bend there.
Yeah. And it's a historical monument now. Point. It's got a sign out there by the highway.
And that's what your family was involved in that?
Yes.
Okay. So you finished working on working at the Big Bend on the Remuda, and then you started with the Forest Service.
Yes.
I mean, the full-time Forest Service.
Right, in Libby.
And what were you doing up there?
Okay, I was a JF, junior forester, just starting out. And of course, at that point in time, Vietnam was still going hot and heavy, and the draft was still there, to more than willing to greet you anytime. And once you got your college degree, it was probably just a matter of time before you got your notice from the draft board that they would like you to come visit. So with the Forest Service, I believe it was you needed to complete 6 months probationary period in order to have your reemployment rights. So I didn't think if I didn't do anything that I'd last that 6 months. I'd have probably been drafted. And so, and secondly, I always figured that if you're going to go to war, you might as well go to war with what I considered the best. And so I went to Spokane to visit the Marine recruiter and see if I could make a deal of I'd volunteer if they would promise to not call me up until after my 6 month probationary period was up. And they said, yep, we could do that. And so I was able to work for my little over 6 months, get my probationary period taken care of so that I would be guaranteed a job with the Forest Service when I got out of the Marine Corps, and then went into the Marine Corps in to OCS in what was it, spring of or September of '68, and went through OCS, went through the basic school for infantry officer training, and one thing that I'd always wanted to do was I'd taken off a lot of times in an airplane, but I hadn't gotten to land in an airplane very often. And so I decided I wanted to see what it was like sitting up there in front, flying one of those dudes. And so if at that point in time in '68 and '69, the Marine Corps and the Navy, normally the Marine Corps pilots go through the Navy program with the naval flight officers, but we needed so many pilots at that point in time that the Marine Corps made some agreements with the Air Force and the Army, and so if you scored high enough on your aptitude test up in the 90th percentile, then as a candidate you could choose whether you wanted to go with the Army if you wanted to fly helicopters, or you could choose to do your initial training with the Air Force if you wanted to fly fixed wing, or you could take the normal route of going through the Navy program. But since I swim like a rock, I didn't want to really have anything to do with the Navy program. And so I chose the Air Force so I could go into fixed-wing fighters, or improve my odds anyway, and ended up at Laughlin Air Force Base in Del Rio, Texas for a year, inter-service tour duty with the Air Force, going through their flight program. And then after getting the Air Force lead wings, I went back to the Marine Corps at Cherry Point with VMAT 203, the TA-4 Squadron, and transitioned into the Navy Marine Corps. way of flying and landing on carriers and all those exciting things. So, and I was there until 71, and we started pulling all of our squadrons out of Vietnam. We suddenly had a surplus of pilots, and they were having to cut down our hours to 35 hours a month and whatnot. And so I offered myself up for an early out, since I had a job waiting for me on the outside if I wanted it, and a lot of the other pilots didn't. And so as to hold a spot for them in the Corps, I got an early out, and in 70, I guess I got back to Montana in 72, I think, and started back work for the Forest Service.
So